Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to break down the highly complex and honestly sometimes shocking realities of navigating the Landlord and Tenant Board in Ontario. Look, whether you're a property owner waiting on thousands of dollars in unpaid rent or a tenant forced to live with a broken heater, you are stepping into a system that has some seriously hidden gears. We're going to use data directly from the board itself to show you exactly how this whole system works, what it truly costs, and most importantly, how to avoid the most common traps.
But right before we dive into the deep end, I do need to share a quick, important note. As an AI-based online lawyer matching platform, Olanar helps connect you with the right professionals, but we do not provide legal advice or legal guides ourselves. The information we are exploring today is strictly educational, designed to just give you a really clear map of the territory.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. 2 doors, 1 room. 2. Cases the board ignores. 3. The price of waiting. 4. Navigating the notice clock. 5. Avoiding costly procedural mistakes. And finally, 6. When to seek representation.
Let's kick things off with Section 1. 2 doors, 1 room. I like to call this the great asymmetry of the LTB.
Imagine 2 completely different doors leading into the exact same hearing room. Which one you walk through dictates your entire experience. On one side, we have landlord applications. These almost always start with the letter L, like the L1 for rent arrears. Now, these cost roughly 4 times more to file, usually around $186. On the other side, tenant applications start with a T, like a T6 for maintenance. These cost a lot less, just $48, but as you'll see, they usually take far, far longer to actually be heard. It's this fascinating asymmetry, right? The party paying the most reaches a hearing the soonest.
And the data brilliantly illustrates exactly why that asymmetry exists. Out of all the portal filings, an overwhelming 89% are coming from landlords. Tenants make up just 11%. So when you hear about the L1 rent arrears stream moving relatively quickly, in about 3 months or so, it's not because the board is playing favorites. No way. With nearly 9 out of 10 portal filings coming from landlords, the board speed here is purely a consequence of volume. They literally just have to stream the most common application fast to keep the entire queue from collapsing.
Moving on to Section 2. Cases the board ignores, establishing the boundary lines.
Listen, before you even worry about which form to file, we have to establish if you're actually in the right place. The board absolutely cannot help with anything outside the Residential Tenancies Act. For example, if you share a kitchen or a bathroom with the owner, you are considered a licensee, not a tenant. The board will simply ignore your case, and your dispute belongs in a regular civil court, like small claims. The Act also excludes things like commercial properties and university residences. Plus, certain rent control rules just don't apply to purpose-built rentals occupied after November 15, 2018. The bottom line? No amount of good evidence will give the board jurisdiction it simply doesn't have.
So what do you do if you just aren't sure? Well, you file a Form A1. Filing this $53 form is a critical step if there's any ambiguity at all about your living situation. Trust me on this, spending $53 right now is incredibly cheap insurance compared to discovering you've been waiting in the wrong legal line for 6 months.
Okay, Section 3, the price of waiting. Let's dig into the hidden carrying costs.
The upfront filing fee, that is actually a tiny fraction of the overall picture. Just notice the stark contrast in these numbers. The landlord pays more, $186, but gets a fast 3-month wait for an arrears hearing. The tenant pays a much lower fee of $48, but that buys them a grueling 5 to 7 months of waiting for something like a maintenance order. And remember, the tenant has to actually live in that unit with the broken heater for every single one of those long months.
But for the landlord, that 3-month wait is financially devastating. Consider this staggering number, $8,800. If a tenant stops paying rent on a $2,200 a month unit and the landlord waits roughly 4 months total to resolve an L1 file, that $8,800 is the true carrying cost of the delay. When you put it into that perspective, the $186 filing fee is literally just 2% of the total financial exposure. The real penalty is the wait itself.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 4, navigating the notice clock. This is time that stacks right on top of the queue. That wait time we just talked about, actually, it doesn't start when you think it does. Landlord applications almost always begin with a mandatory notice, and the time that notice takes to expire runs entirely outside the board's official queue. So if we look at an N4 notice for unpaid rent, you have a strict 14-day clock before you can even hit submit on your L1 application. That means a so-called 3-month board wait is really a 3.5-month reality from the day you first take action. And if it's an N13 notice for a renovation, that clock is 120 days before you even get in line.
So, let's look at the life cycle of a file. The crucial point here is that stages 1, 2, and 4, serving the notice, filing your paperwork, and disclosing your evidence, are entirely in your control. Stage 3, scheduling by the board, is the massive bottleneck you absolutely cannot speed up. This is exactly why you have to execute the stages you do control with absolute perfection.
Section 5. Avoiding costly procedural mistakes. In other words, don't get thrown out on a technicality.
Because the wait times are so severe, making a simple paperwork error doesn't just mean a quick do-over. No way. It means you could spend months in line just to be immediately thrown out at the hearing and sent right back to square one. For landlords, a single miscounted day on a termination notice or failing to pay the mandatory compensation for an N12 eviction by the deadline entirely destroys the application before a single fact is even discussed. Also, a notice is not an eviction order. If a landlord treats a notice as an eviction and changes the locks, they have just committed an illegal lockout, which hands the tenant a fast-tracked urgent hearing.
Tenants have their own procedural landmines too. The biggest one, gathering evidence way too late. Taking photos of a broken heater after the landlord finally fixes it is completely useless. You absolutely must gather your visual evidence and written logs while the problem is actively happening to succeed at your T6 hearing. Tenants also frequently miss the newly shortened 15-day window to request a review of an order, or they just assume they can't challenge a bad faith eviction once they've already moved out. But actually, they absolutely can with a T5 form.
Our final part, Section 6, when to seek representation and matching with the right professional.
With procedure deciding way more files than fairness ever does, when does paying for representation actually cost less than the delay? Well, if any of these specific situations apply to you, getting professional help is critical. If thousands of dollars are on the line, if the other side already has a legal representative, or if you literally have an eviction order physically in your hand, you need guidance. At this tribunal, a missed deadline isn't just a suggestion, it is absolute and it is final.
This is exactly where Olaner steps in to help. By simply describing your situation in plain language, Olaner automatically matches you with a verified legal professional in your area at absolutely no cost to you. And what's really great is that because both lawyers and licensed paralegals can appear at this board, Olaner can match you with a more economical licensed paralegal for a straightforward arrears file, ensuring you get the exact right level of help to avoid these catastrophic procedural traps.
I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to consider today. You've seen the data, you've seen the massive hidden carrying costs, the strict notice clocks, and all those procedural landmines of the Landlord and Tenant Board. So I just have to ask, when a single miscounted day on a form can cost you another 7 months of waiting, is risking your time and money by going unrepresented really the cheapest option? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.